It's horse beef here. What's going on? Today, I would like to see, just off the back of that beautiful performance from Alex Pereira against Khalil Roundtree over the weekend, today I would like to see exactly how Alex Pereira stacks up against the top 10 greatest fighters of all time, at least like roughly the top 10. Like, I didn't really put too much thought into this top 10. This is just like the bog standard greatest fighters of all time when it really comes down to it. This is my personal top 10. You can probably remove Randy Couture or maybe even Volkanovski if you'd like to, but I think the rest are relatively safe. Even Khabib to me, but I know a lot of people do consider Khabib to be a top 10 fighter of all time. Some even consider him to be a top 5 fighter of all time. So I thought that I would actually see how he stacks up to some of these fighters here, or if not all of them. But I don't think that it's fair to really compare Alex Pereira to the likes of a Demetrius Johnson or an Anderson Silva because of this super long title reigns, 10 defenses each. John Jones as well because of the overall domination and resume. I don't think it's fair to compare him to him. GSP as well. Stipe. But the rest, maybe we can actually get into something of a comparison here to see if he actually does fit within the top 10 greatest fighters of all time. So let's compare him to the records, resumes, accolades of some of these fighters that I've put down here as my top 10, right? If you don't consider Randy Couture a top 10 of all time, I understand that, right? He's pretty interchangeable. There are a few fighters that you could replace him with. I'm sure there are some who would maybe put Kamaru Usman in there. But I think his resume is a little bit overrated. Same thing goes for Israel Adesanya's resume. I think his is a little bit overrated. He does have some elite wins on there like Alex Pereira himself. I'm not too sure if he's quite worthy of being in the top 10. But then again, a lot of people would say that I'm crazy for having Randy Couture in mine. Like I said, I could easily think of a few fighters that could replace Randy. I just have Randy in here because of the fact that he was the first fighter to ever hold belts from 2 different weight classes. Not simultaneously, but 2-division champion nonetheless. First to ever do it. And 5-time champion, 3-time heavyweight, 2-time light heavyweight. And as I said about GSP, Stipe, DC, Jose Aldo, Demetrius Johnson, and Anderson Silva, John Jones, I would say those are all untouchable when it comes to comparisons. Yeah, we can still make the comparison, but at the end of the day, I don't think that would really come to anything. I don't think Alex Pereira has done enough, right? 3 title defenses is very impressive, especially when you consider that compared to someone like Khabib, who was in the sport, or sorry, in the company part of the UFC for about 8 years, right? He was signed in 2012 and had his retirement fight in 2020, and within those 8 years, Khabib fought 13 times. 13 times. Alex Pereira's been in the company, or part of the company, since 2021. It's now 2024. So 3 years in the company and has fought a total of 10 times. That activity propels Alex Pereira, not based on the activity alone, but it's the fact that he was able to accomplish what fighters like Khabib weren't even able to accomplish in their 8 years in the organization. Think about that. Because anyone trying to gatekeep Alex Pereira from being considered a top 10 all-time fighter, I think, are just using the fact that he's still relatively new to MMA, but that shouldn't factor in when he's really fast-tracked his career to a ridiculous degree. And over the course of 10 fights, he's beaten every single fighter put in front of him, beaten multiple champions, would-be champions, future champions, or past champions, right? If you look at the resume of Alex Poatan Pereira, the fact that he only has 10 fights in the UFC, right? Beat Andre Michailidis, beat Bruno Silva, and then goes on to beat Sean Strickland, who would eventually become a champion. So that's one. Alex Pereira, Israel Adesanya. So that's 2 champions. Then loses to Israel Adesanya, and then goes up in weight, beats Jan Blachowicz, controversially to some. For me, I think it's a clean win for Alex Pereira. So that's yet another champion. That's 3. Yuri Prochazka twice. That's 4 champions. Jamal Hill, who he beat to become 205 champion in the first place at UFC 300. So that's another champion. And then just recently Khalil Roundtree. So not a champ, but a 3rd title defense nonetheless. So if you compare that to Khabib Nurmagomedov, that is 3 title defenses over the course of a year, right? Within a calendar year, he has matched the amount of title defenses which Khabib was able to put up on a yearly basis. So we saw Khabib defending the title year after year after year. Alex Pereira's matched that in one calendar year. So everyone talking about how he's ducking Ankalaev and all that, and he hasn't fought the real competitors that we want to see him fight. Yeah, but you can only beat who's put in front of you, number one. And I feel like we need to give him a little bit of leeway considering the activity. And also, if you look at the top 15 light heavyweights right now, if you consider who's up there and the fact that Ankalaev and Rakic are already signed to fight each other, honestly, unless you consider Nikita Krylov to be more deserving of a title shot than Khalil Rountree actually makes a lot of sense to be fighting for the title. So for me, considering Ankalaev and Rakic are already booked, it actually made sense to give the title shot to Khalil Rountree just because of how weird the top 10 right now of 205 is. Right? There aren't really any other top contenders that made sense to go up against Alex Pereira. And even though you may not consider him a great contender for the belt, he still dispatched him in beautiful fashion, faced some adversity, and showed the makings of a champ, right? But because before I can really consider someone like a true champion, I like to see them tested like that. And I know we've seen Pereira tested against Izzy, but at 205, this version of Alex Pereira, right, this 205 version is just a different animal. So I enjoyed seeing him face some adversity, lose those first 2 rounds and then come back and just end up steamrolling Khalil in the 4th round. Shows the quality, and the fact that he's so one-dimensional as well is pretty crazy. Like I know he does have some pretty decent jiu-jitsu. I know he's technically a black belt, but there's a difference between an Alex Pereira black belt and like a Damian Maia black belt. There's a huge gap in terms of skill. Like not all black belts are equal at the end of the day. So really, when you come down to it, Alex Pereira is a one-dimensional fighter, and he is a dominant champion as things go. Matches the title defenses, as I said, of Khabib. Has a better resume and has more champions, former champions, under his belt. I mean, seriously, this might turn into a bit of a rant as to why I think Khabib's so overrated. But yeah, he's 29-0, sure. Majority of his wins, well, I don't want to say a majority. Actually, yes, a majority, right? Because he's 29-0, 13-0 in the UFC. So a good majority of his wins happened against cans outside the UFC. Padded the record, comes in, wins the strap against Al Iaquinta. That should never happen. That should just never happen. And his win against Conor McGregor is considered a title defense. I think that his win against Conor McGregor shouldn't even be considered a title defense because he should have never been able to win the belt off of Al Iaquinta in the first place, right? Beating a number 10 ranked guy and becoming undisputed champion off that makes no sense to me. So he shouldn't even have 3 title defenses. He should only have 2. And yes, get wins over McGregor, Gaethje, and Poirier are elite wins for sure. They're great wins. But that's really all you have to offer. I mean, yeah, RDA, great win. At that time, RDA wasn't as great as he would turn out to be. Edson Barbosa, pretty good win, but even Edson himself doesn't have a whole lot of great wins on the resume, and it's a perfect stylistic matchup for him. So for me, this might be controversial, and I know all the Khabib super fans are going to hate me for it, but I believe that Alex Pereira has actually solidified himself as a greater fighter than Khabib. 3 less fights in the UFC, yet has beaten more champions and has matched his title defenses already. Like 1 more title defense for Pereira, and it's solidified. It's solidified. But for me, it's already solidified. He's greater than Khabib, surpassed Randy Couture as well. Could you compare him to someone like Volkanovski? For me, I think he has a little bit more to do just because of the fact that Volkanovski has 4 wins over the 2 greatest, other than him, of course, 2 greatest featherweights of all time, and picked up some very dominant title defenses along the way at featherweight. Yes, dared to be great, dared to go up and challenge Islam for the title, failed at it, but I can't really fault the guy because at least he tried, right? He tried, he failed though. So yeah, I'm sure there are some people who would say that Volkanovski doesn't even deserve to be in the top 10 here. For me, he has to be. Could Alex Pereira have surpassed him at this point? Right now, as far as the pound for pound discussion goes, 100%. But as an all-timer, is it possible that Alex Pereira could be greater than Volkanovski? I mean, Volk has been super active himself, right? Signed and fought in the UFC for the first time in 2016. Since then, picked up wins over Yusuke Kasuya, Mizuta Hirota, Shane Young, Jeremy Kennedy, Darren Elkins. Then it gets good, right? Chad Mendez, great win. Jose Aldo, elite win. 2 back-to-back wins over Max Holloway, elite wins. Brian Ortega, pretty good win. Maybe hasn't aged the best. Chan Sung Jung, At that time, not the best win over Chan Sung Jung, but then another elite win over Max Holloway. Loses to Islam controversially, and then destroys Yair Rodriguez. Right, one of the more impressive finishes I've seen in recent memory. I know it's not flashy, but just the whole finishing sequence is a thing of beauty. And then 2 back-to-back KO losses, I think, takes a little bit away from Volkanovski. But when you really consider that and you compare them, Alex Pereira has had 3 title defenses compared to how many for Volkanovski? How many for Volkanovski, really? Wins the belt off Max, defends it against Max, defends against Brian Ortega, defends it against Chan Sung Jung, defends it against Max Holloway again, and then goes up, loses, defends it against Yair. So that's 5 title defenses for Volk, so he has that over Pereira. But then Pereira has the fact that he's won belts in 2 weight classes and has beaten more champs and former champs than Volkanovski. So can you consider Alex Pereira to be overall greater than Volkanovski? Which Alex is greater? For me, it's kind of a toss-up. It depends on how you weigh up Volkanovski's resume versus Pereira's. Some people consider Volkanovski's resume to be one of the greatest of all time, and if that's the case, then it's tough to justify Alex being over him. But all I'm going to say is that there is an argument for it, at the very, very least. And then, as I said earlier on the video, Demetrius Johnson, resume-wise, Pereira's for sure greater in terms of just straight resume, but the title defenses and the long string of dominant victories for Demetrius Johnson, like to stay champion for that long, is truly unprecedented. Same thing goes for Anderson Silva. I do consider Pereira's resume to be greater than Anderson Silva's, but same argument for Demetrius Johnson to hold on to the belt for that long is, as I said, unprecedented. John Jones as well, drug cheat, 100% terrible person. But as far as facts go, Jones is pretty untouchable. GSP as well. I think it would be pretty unfair to compare him to Stipe as well, considering Stipe is the greatest heavyweight of all time and has a ridiculous resume. He really does, and he's just too big to move down and become a 2-weight champion. And when it comes to Jose Aldo, the long title defense streak in WEC, continued that in the UFC, and then the long sustained success, and only having lost to the best of the best, really, champions and former champions. When it comes to Jose Aldo, he's only lost to the best of the best, and in some cases, a little controversially, like when it comes to his loss against Marlon Moraes, I would say that he should have probably been awarded the win for that one, but I digress. And yeah, as I said, the long sustained success for him is pretty unprecedented for him to look as good as he still does at this age, move down in weight, and arguably should be on a title run as we speak, because he should have had that win over Mario Batista and should be in a position to be given a number 1 contender shot. But unfortunately, it is not to be, because Mario Batista is a bitch and judges don't know how to judge fights. But I would like to, before we close off this video here, I would actually like to compare him to Daniel Cormier to see if he could actually surpass him. Because for me, Daniel Cormier, there's an argument that he's a top 5 fighter of all time. He could actually be, right? A lot of people would say it's GSP, John Jones, Silva, Demetrius, and then DC. For me, it might be either him, Jose Aldo, or Stipe Miocic. So I actually want to see if there's an argument that Alex Pereira's resume and overall accolades are greater than DC, because keep in mind, both of them are 2 weight class champions, right? 2 weight class champions, both of them, but the difference is that DC was a simultaneous 2 weight class champion. So he was a proper double champ, right? But I would like to get into the specifics of DC's resume and then compare it as such, just to see if there's any argument, right? I'm not saying that I believe this, but let's just see, right? So his first fight in the UFC, DC's, we have his win against Frank Mir, and then he beats Roy Nelson, Patrick Cummings, and then Dan Henderson, right? So in those first 4 wins in the UFC, you do have some crazy ones, right? Frank Mir is a heavyweight legend, former champ. Dan Henderson, former champ in Pride as well, 2 weight class champ in Pride, as I've said before. John Jones, he loses to, and then goes on to beat Anthony Johnson, Alexander Gustafsson, Anderson Silva, former champ, although it was on short notice, but a great win to have on the resume. Anthony Johnson again, Volkan Ozdemir, beats Stipe Miocic, beats Derek Lewis, and then loses twice to Stipe Miocic. I just think that the the longevity and the quality of some of those wins probably does keep DC firmly ahead of Alex Pereira. Yeah, you know what? Just to be completely real there, I don't think there is much of an argument for Alex Pereira to be above DC two-weight champion, although he was kind of gifted one of those belts just based on the fact that John Jones was suspended. So yeah, but I'm gonna be completely fair here and say that he's not above DC. But when we're talking about the greatest fighters of all time, the top 10 greatest, I think, whether you consider Randy Couture a top 10 or not, I believe that Alex Pereira is greater and is greater than any other fighter that you could put in Randy Couture's spot, including Kamaru Usman and including Israel Adesanya. And I know the Izzy fans are going to hate that one, right? They hate to admit that Alex Pereira has already surpassed him. But for me, it's not really up for debate. More wins over former champions, right? And 2 weight class champion to go on top of that. And when you compare him to a fighter like Volkanovski, it's razor thin. But when you compare him to someone like Khabib, right? If you consider Khabib to be a top 5 fighter of all time, then in my opinion, you have to say that Pereira is now a top 5 fighter of all time because he's matched the title defenses and beaten more former champions than Khabib. So for me, even though Alex Pereira's only been in the organization for 3 years, he has done enough to solidify himself as a top 10 fighter of all time. And as far as where he is and within that top 10, I don't really know. You can call him number 10, number 9, number 8. But I believe that's about as far as I could go with it. And as far as pound for pound goes right now, he's either neck and neck with Islam or just actually slightly edging Islam, just considering the activity of Alex Pereira compared to the activity of Islam. So it's just amazing, man. I wanted to really come in here and compare the resumes of some of these great fighters, the accolades, all that, and just see where Alex Pereira stacks up. And I'm not even surprised to come to the conclusion that Alex Pereira deserves to be mentioned within the top 10, which is just unprecedented. The fact that he's done it so quickly, man, and that is the beauty of activity. If you stay active, you can solidify yourself in a short amount of time. And he's pushing 40, man. He came into the UFC out of his prime. This isn't even his prime years, at least they shouldn't be. Maybe Alex Pereira's prime works a little differently than the rest of us. But man, he impresses me. And I don't care if you say that he's ducking certain fighters. You can only beat who's put in front of you. And as far as I know, Ankalaev has been extremely difficult to deal with for the UFC. Doesn't want to fight during Ramadan. Only wants to fight in Abu Dhabi or whatever. So at the end of the day, Alex Pereira is fighting who he's able to fight. And I do think that he will get along to fighting Ankalaev in the future. And if he does, and he beats him, then it's solidified even to an even greater extent that he is a top 10 fighter of all time. And if he goes up and challenges for the heavyweight strap and really tries to become a 3-division weight class champion, and he accomplishes that, then there is an argument, a strong argument, that Alex Pereira becomes the greatest fighter to ever compete in MMA, which is just an insane thought considering how new he is to MMA still. It's insane, man. Alex Pereira is different gravy, one of the greats. I wouldn't consider myself a poetard, but I do love that name for a fan base. I think it's hilarious. I really do think it's hilarious. So if you guys want to come in here and call me a poetard, you go right ahead, because I will wear that like a badge of honor. I think it's hilarious. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below how you personally rank Alex Pereira, whether you think he stacks up well against some of the top 10 fighters of all time, or whether you think that he's overrated and you think that I'm a dumbass for thinking that he is a top 10 fighter of all time. Either way is fine. But anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next one.